Hey everybody, welcome to YouTube Live. Hope you're doing well today. I'm Chad Carson. Some people call me Coach Carson, and we're going to have some fun today. I don't know how I'll plan on being here in an hour and a half or so, if we have enough questions. But I'm also, if we don't have as much, we can stay a little bit shorter. But every week I get a few questions from people on email and messaging, and I thought this would be a great way to interact with you guys and do some live video with you and interact a little bit and also answer some questions and discuss what's on your mind. Just to get started today, if you like this, if you think this is interesting, please share it around. That'll get more people on the call. I'd appreciate that. And think about your questions, things you want to ask. If you would also introduce yourself, I want to know who you are. That way I can know, where you're from, kind of know who I'm talking to. I'm the only one on the video here, so it's nice to have some interaction and know who is behind the other end of the screen. So that way I can know, where you're from, kind of know who I'm talking to. I'm the only one on the video here, so it's nice to have some interaction and know who is behind the other end of the screen. So just tell me your name, your location, and then be thinking about those questions that you want to talk about. I'm just going to give you a little bit background on me in case somebody's watching a replay, hasn't heard of me before or said hello and doesn't know about my background. I live in Clemson, South Carolina, have rental properties there. These days have about 90 units that a business partner and I own together. And so we've been in business for 16 years, and kind of my big picture of what I try to do in my own business and also with Coach Carson is using real estate rental properties and passive income to be able to have flexibility, have free time, be able to, we call that retire early. And so that's what I wrote a book about this year. But that's kind of my background. I'm happy to talk more details about my business and what it means to how to manage properties remotely. I was in Ecuador for about a year and a half, was able to manage a lot of properties from abroad. So that's something I'm familiar with and work a lot with. But also I'm happy to talk about all sorts of things, about buying properties. I've bought a lot of properties over the years, about financing properties, about different strategies to retire early with real estate. All of that's fair game. I love to talk about it. Love to hear from you. So we have a couple people on the call. Dan O'Connell's here from Spartanburg. Hey, Dan, good to have you. Casey Harder left a question earlier. I'm going to get to Casey here. When we start doing questions, you'll be first. Chris D is in Simpsonville. All right, another couple South Carolina people. Welcome. We got Casey Harder is in Arizona. Welcome, Casey. So great, good to have all of you here. And I know more people will be jumping on the call as we keep going. I just have to say, you might see some sun coming in the background. This is the first day, and I don't know, it feels like a week or so since we've had some sunshine. So this is pretty nice. I'm enjoying that. Want to get outside later today, even though it's cold, and do a little exercise and get out and about. All right, so let's jump into what we're here for, to do some discussion, do some questions. Again, if you're jumping on the call and you're just getting here, just leave your name and where you're from. I'd love to hear from you. So let's go first. I know Casey said you'll be coming back later, or you might not be able to stay on. So let me go ahead and jump on your question, because I really like it. So Casey basically says, here's the situation, saying, I have several condos that you own, that Casey owns outright. They're rental properties, and Casey's considering selling one of these to a sibling. So once the property is sold, so this condo is sold to the sibling, so to his sister, he would then like to do a long-term lease, so a lease option, and then lease it back from that sibling. And so then that would give you the ability to sublease it to another tenant. So that might, if you've never heard of that kind of thing, everybody else listening, that might go a little bit over your head. I actually did a YouTube video called Master Lease Optioning and also Credit Partnering, which is kind of similar to what you're talking about here, Casey. So excuse me, dropped my watch there. So I love that concept. And let me keep going with your question though. And so your sibling would receive a $5,000 in option money and about $50 a month after paying the mortgage. So that they would get a little bit of cash flow, they get some principal pay down, and then you would give them $5,000 up front. So there's some benefits to them, and it's a passive investment, right? That's another benefit. And then your benefit is you are able to make $200 a month by subleasing it to your tenant, and then you'd be able to use that cash to go buy another property. And so I like it. I think so. If I had to summarize this whole deal, what is it? I've done something similar in the past. I didn't already own the condo, but I bought a property using a similar arrangement to this, where another investor a friend who liked to invest with me. They bought the property. They used their own money, their own down payment. They got a mortgage. And then I was the one who subleased it from them and kind of managed the tenants. And so they just got a very passive investment. So I like that arrangement. I call it like a credit partnership. It's a master lease option. There's a couple little techniques you're using in there. But yeah, if you're curious about my thoughts, I like that transaction a lot. It's very creative. And I think it's a win-win. I mean, both of you are benefiting. They're getting a passive investment. They're able to benefit from real estate without having to do all the find the deal, manage it, do everything else. So I really like that idea. Here. And then for you, you're able to control a property using a very small amount of money, and you're able to get that cash, go buy your next property. The only thing this kind of came to mind, just as I'm thinking out loud, Casey, is thinking about tax consequences. I'm not sure what your basis is in the property, and making sure you recover enough cash to pay for depreciation recapture, which is kind of a gotcha. You get the benefit from depreciation all those years when you're renting the property, and it offsets some of your current income and saves you money on your current taxes. But it always comes back around. So the IRS, when you sell the property and you have to recapture that depreciation, and the tax, it's a complicated tax entry, but it might be around 25% of what that depreciation was over those years you'll have to pay in tax. So you need to speak with your CPA or tax counsel on that and make sure you get enough money out of the sale to cover that. I'm not sure what your price would be on sale. You might be selling it at a little bit lower price to your siblings, so you just want to make sure you cover that. So very interesting. I'd love to hear how it goes, Casey, after you do it. If there's any follow-up questions, feel free to let me know. But I love the creativity and the way you're thinking of, thinking outside the box to get capital. That's what I had to do from the very beginning in my business. I started out of college, and I was just had $1,000 and no job and no experience investing in real estate. So I always had to get really creative, using other people's capital, using lease options and seller financing and self-directed IRA investing accounts from other investors who had loaned that to me. So that was my sort of just bread and butter, just because I had to. But over time, it really helped me out, because during the recession, when banks kind of dried up and weren't loaning as much money, these kinds of things were what I continued to use, because I'd always done that. And even today, I really prefer using private investors, investing with my little inner circle. Sometimes it's a little bit more expensive, but I sort of look at it as the cost of less hassle and the cost of having access to capital at all times. And I feel really good about the fact that some of my investors are retiring off this money that I'm paying them. So your sibling is getting this passive investment. I feel really good about the fact that I'm sort of the provider of retirement income or wealth building income for a lot of people. So that's a lot of win-wins all the way around. So keep going, Casey. Do some more of those. That sounds good. All right. So anybody else has questions? If you're just arriving today, this is Ask Coach Live, and so it's all about you. It's about what your questions are. I'm really excited that we're doing this on YouTube. I've done a couple on Facebook, but been neglecting my YouTube audience, and I love YouTube. I'm on YouTube all the time myself, and I really want to do more with YouTube in 2019. So I hope you all stick with me and give me some suggestions and other things you want to learn about here with videos in the future. All right, so let's go to the next question. I'll take some more live questions. I'm going to prioritize your questions, all of you who are here live. That way, you're here, we can interact. I have some other questions I'm going to answer that were submitted to me ahead of time from other people. But just be thinking about what you'd like to talk about. Chris D says he's been learning about lease options and helping for sale by owners to sell their house. Yeah, so I sort of look at this kind of technique that we just talked about, the master lease option. It's like a tool in a toolbox. And that's really what all of your financing and creative financing kind of techniques are. They're not like a cure-all for all properties. Sometimes you have people who teach just do a bunch of lease options or do a bunch of subject to, or, whatever. Those are all it's like a screwdriver, a hammer, a saw. All of those are pretty appropriate in certain situations. But your job as a problem solver, a buyer of real estate, is to sit down with the seller, talk to them, try to understand what they're trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish, and then see if the tools you have in your toolbox are helpful for them. And so this is just one particular tool. Just paying cash and giving another person cash as a tool as well. And that's the pretty common tool. And I always use the comparison that's kind of like a hammer. That's what most investors know how to use. They learn how to use a hammer, and then they go around trying to use a hammer on every single seller, every single situation. When if you were building a house, you would never just use a hammer over and over again. So you gotta expand your toolbox if you want to be able to buy more properties and solve more problems for sellers. And that's sort of the going from 101 real estate investing to 201, 301. It's an important step. And I have some videos here on YouTube about some of my creative financing techniques. So check out my channel for that. I'm going to be doing more and more of that in the future. I haven't taught that in new classes or done any of that live in a while, but I'd like to. All right. So Bill Ramirez, hey Bill, welcome to the live. There are venture capital-backed companies like Zillow, Open Door, OfferPad, and Knock buying homes directly from sellers. How do you see that affecting the market and small investors? Yeah, I've been reading about that. I'm interested to see how that goes. I see it similarly to the trend that kind of started with home investors and the idea of like corporate or franchise buying of houses. And there's, as a small investor, I think there's two sides of this coin. There is no doubt that a big company who has marketing money behind them, who can go do a bunch of things, they can get a lot of publicity, they can send a lot of direct mail, they can do a lot of that they have some advantages marketing wise. And so that's something to be a little concerned about if you're a small investor. But I think the other side of that is, so far, like most of what I've seen at least, is that a lot of them are in bigger cities. Like I don't know that I've seen that being like a big effect in my little small town or in upstate of South Carolina, although I could be wrong. So maybe it's more, I'm curious to know maybe what you've heard, Bill, but it seems like a lot of the bigger cities, kind of metro areas, that's where they have more economies of scale. Like go to Atlanta where they can send out letters to millions of people instead of just smaller markets. So that's kind of big market, small markets, one thing I'd think about. But the other is, my competitive advantage has always been to be personalized. And so I just have a hard time thinking that their cash necessarily is any different than my cash if I'm sitting there talking to a seller. And I will go with my advantage 9 times out of 10 if we're paying a similar price, but I can be that person, that local individual who sends them a personalized letter, who they get to know a little bit better. If they know you and trust you and like you, and you have similar prices, I think that wins. The benefit they have is maybe reaching people before you reach them, having a more marketing channel. So I think that's something to, like I said, be concerned about, be thinking about. But I think what we always do, and every time there's a competitive disadvantage, you always think about, like, all right, what's my niche? What do I have to offer? It's like little small businesses trying to compete with Walmart. Like you would never try to compete with Walmart on price. You would try to compete with Walmart on service. You would try to sell different products, sell it in a different way. Don't try to be Walmart. And so I don't think we don't want to try to be Zillow. We don't want to try to do their analytics better. We don't want to try to do big number analysis better. What we want to do is be personal better, be a real person, so that can be reflected in everything you do, Bill. If they've been buying like the higher end fix and flips, are they buying lower end like B, C property, C and D kind of properties? Is it all the above? Because I'm still learning as well to see what they're up to. All right. While I'm waiting for Bill to answer a little bit about that, about what the Zillows and Open Door kind of people are up to. Chris says, yeah, I'm learning lease options first, but I'm also learning how to do subject to, land contracts, multi-mortgage, wholesaling, etc. Yeah, so there are lots of tools out there, and just learning to do them correctly. I like to look at real estate as you're a craftsman. That's why I sort of alluded to that earlier, that instead of being like a one-trick pony, I think it's better to understand the fundamentals of buying real estate. Like I got into trouble a little bit earlier in my career, not in trouble necessarily, but buying bad deals because I got too enamored with the tools themselves. Like, oh, here's a lease option, here's subject to. But the fundamentals of buying real estate is very simple. You've got to make positive cash flow. You want to try to buy below the full price. Buy low, sell high. I mean, some of those things, those fundamentals that I talk a lot about with analyzing deals, apply whether you're buying subject to, lease option, whatever the case might be. You can adjust your analysis a little bit. For example, on a lease option, there's a lot less risk getting an option to buy a property than actually plumping down your cash to buy that property. Because with an option, you can walk away from it. You can let them keep your option deposit. So option is a really good way to be more aggressive with your price. If you're going to speculate, don't speculate by putting a bunch of cash down. Try to speculate on the market going up by getting an option or a lease option. And so I love it. As long as you know why you're using that tool, I think it's great. The way I think I have gotten in trouble and other people get in trouble is just sort of seeing it as like a tool you can use all the time. And that it's particularly subject to income. Some of those, I think I hear people using them as kind of, oh, you can pay more for it because it's subject to, and you don't owe that money. It's somebody else's mortgage. And I don't agree with that at all. I think it's, if you do any of it, you make an obligation to pay that, whether it's in your name or not, it's your mortgage. So I would want to make sure it's a very low loan to value mortgage, or the cash flow is positive. And so that's not always the case. A lot of subject to deals I see people doing aren't good deals, basically. So just make sure you run the numbers and it's a good deal no matter what tool you use. That's my main point. Chris asks, what are some good ways to find motivated sellers when you're starting out? Good question. It's always one of the most common questions I get, but it's most important as well. So I'll just give you a couple. I always start with like the free ones you can do like right now, although there's a long list. You can go through a laundry list of different techniques, and these techniques change all the time. What worked last month or last year doesn't necessarily work this year. So finding deals and generating leads is a lot about practice and just trial and error to see what's working. But here's a couple tried and true that I always talk about because they seem to keep working and not as many people do them. The first one is driving for dollars or walking for dollars. So the basic concept here is that you are farming different neighborhoods. So you zone in and figure out a niche in your city, in your town, and you start farming them by actually going out into that market and driving around is possible, but it'd be even better if you could kind of walk around like on a Saturday morning. So just take your dog out, push a stroller if you have kids, just go around the neighborhood, get your exercise in. And what you're looking for a few things when you're walking or driving for dollars. Number one, you're looking for any sign of a house for sale. So for sale by owner sign, a listed sign, although the listed by realtor sign is not necessarily a deal. It's not the one you're looking for, but you should probably call every one of those or look them up on your realtor.com app while you're walking around and look on your phone just to see, is it an interesting deal? If it looks vacant, it looks like a bank-owned property or something, and it's listed by a realtor, that might be interesting. If it looks like it's vacant, maybe it was inherited, it just needs a lot of work, it's kind of a fixer-upper property, that's interesting too. So those would be two things I would look for. Would be, look for vacant properties, look for properties that are listed but look like fixer-uppers perhaps, and then I would also look for houses that are for rent by owners. And there's a little bit not intuitive, but like if you see a for rent sign, particularly if it's like it's a handwritten sign, somebody says for rent, instead of being like a professional mortgage management company, like I would call every one of those signs like if it's a landlord, because then you can talk to them and they might be just wanting to rent the house and they don't want to sell it. But I've often asked, I see you're renting that property. I'm also a landlord in town. If I can send you some tenants, I'd be happy to do that. Just wanted to find out what you're wanting to rent it for. And if you're also interested in selling it, I would be interested in buying it. Are you looking to sell it as well? And sometimes, 1 out of 10, they'll turn it around and say, yeah, I actually hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I consider selling it at the right price. And so then you start a conversation. So you're looking for signs for rent by owner, for sale by owner, listed with realtors. Then you're also looking for, here's my favorite, are ones that are just, there's no sign in the yard, but it's obviously vacant. And so if the house is vacant, somebody's moved out and just left it sitting there. Maybe they're in between houses, they're getting ready to put it on the market, or maybe they inherited it and it's just sitting there for a while. Maybe it's a pre-foreclosure situation. There's all sorts of reasons why it might be sitting vacant, and none of them are good for the house. Because when a house sits vacant, like that's bad for maintenance, that's bad for everything else. And so I would write those down. I'd have a list of all the vacant houses. And if you go out for 2 or 3 hours, you might find, depending on the neighborhood that you're in, 5, 10 vacant houses is possible. Particularly if you're in the kind of B, C neighborhoods as opposed to like A neighborhoods, which are like the nicest, most expensive neighborhoods. They're going to find fewer there that look vacant, but you get down into the B minus and C, you're definitely going to find some vacant houses. So you can be as aggressive as you want in trying to track down who owns that. You can, I like to talk to the neighbors, like knock on the door of the neighbor and ask them, say, I'm looking to buy a property in this neighborhood. I noticed this one looks vacant and I'd like to perhaps buy it and fix it up. And ask them who the owner is, if they know the owner, if they have a way to get in touch. Neighbors know a lot about who owns the house and what the situation is. And they might want to get that vacant, ugly house fixed up. So that's a great way to start, is by talking to the neighbors. But if that doesn't work, you can also leave a note on the door asking them to call you back. You can get home, and now you have your list of vacant houses. Look up who the owner is on the tax assessor records for your county, and then send them a handwritten note. Here's where that personal kind of competitive advantage comes in. You send them a note saying something like, hi, this is Chad Carson. I live nearby a property you own at such and such address. I'm interested in buying a house in that neighborhood. If you're interested in selling, I'd love to talk to you. Please give me a call. Here's my phone number. Here's my cell phone number. Very simple, but it's very personal. It's direct to the point. And if you're doing 10 or 15 of those, you can handwrite every one of them. That is going to be more likely to be opened, it's more likely to be read, it's more likely to be responded to. So that's a long-winded answer for how I'm finding, I've always done that and always been able to find deals doing that. I also try to get other people kind of using their eyes and ears. So if they're out in the neighborhood looking at stuff, I want them to call me and let me know about those same things. So it's sometimes when I'm not there, that's a way to have other people bringing me leads. I also like to go on the MLS, and I know the multiple listing service, particularly in some markets, gets very competitive as you get up in the upper cycle of the market where we are right now. There's gonna be fewer deals, but I have a friend locally in Clemson who's a real estate agent investor, and he has bought 2 deals or got 2 deals under contract recently from the MLS, and even in this hot competitive market. So if you're watching it daily, you're always paying attention. Most of them are not going to be deals, but there might be some that come around. And there might be some that start off not as a deal and they look interesting, but they're just too high of a price. And maybe they go under contract and then it falls through from contract because there's some repair issues. If you could kind of keep a list of the ones that are kind of close but not there yet, and then keep following up as they're longer on the market, then you might be able to kind of backdoor some MLS deals as well. So those are sort of my fundamental always do. When I'm turning the volume up and trying to buy more properties, I'll get more aggressive about networking with other people, making sure I'm on all the wholesalers lists in my area through networking at my local investment club. I'll send direct mail to certain lists, maybe pre-foreclosure direct mail, maybe expired listings. Whenever realtors have a property listed and it expires, you can get your realtor friend or realtor who you use to send you lists of all the expired listings and send them letters. I do direct mail to different segments of my market. So people who've owned them for a while, they've owned them for 20 years or more, more likely to have equity in the property. I'll send letters to them sometimes, send letters to landlords, so people who don't live in the property. And so all of those are different, a little bit more advanced techniques because it costs more money to send a lot of that direct mail. But if you want to turn the volume up, you can do some of that direct mail. You can also do social media and like Facebook ads and things like that is the newer, probably more effective these days in some ways, having an online presence. So a lot of the stuff you see me doing here with Coach Carson and different things, you can do that same thing with your social media presence, just getting out there and let people know what you do as a house buyer. So good question. Thanks for bringing that up. See who else has some more questions. All right, Casey Harder says, I'm interested in kind of a follow-up to that original question. I'm interested in purchasing additional condos, and I've done research to determine who owns the condo and how much they purchased them for. I haven't yet reached out to any of the owners, and I wanted advice on ways to approach them. Should I send a mailer, or have you had better luck with face-to-face interactions? I'm also trying to determine which condos I should target. At the top of my list are condos where there's either no loan or a loan balance that is less than what I'm willing to pay. Yeah, I think that's the good place to start, Casey. I mean, I always start with the general location. So you're starting with a condo building first, which is a good place to start. You heard me mention some of those direct mail campaigns just earlier, but I think looking at ones that they've owned them longer, or if you can tell what the loan balance is by going on public records, that's a great way to do it. If they just bought it 3 months ago and they have a FHA loan or some 5% down loan, it's kind of hard to think they would come out of pocket to sell it to you at a little bit lower price. So that's the logic behind it, and I think that makes sense. So looking at what they paid for it, looking at how long they've owned it, I wouldn't spend too much time on it. I think it's sometimes there's a balance between spending so much time like filtering out the list and just getting some letters out the door. Because the worst thing that would happen if you just get it out the door and you just spend time on something else is that somebody calls you and you can't help them. Like, what if it's a price you can't make sense? They call you and I want to sell my condo for this price and it's above what you can do. That's not great, but it's also not the end of the world. Maybe you build a relationship with them. Maybe they're a landlord too, and maybe you can interact. So I'm less worried about like being super filtered and more worried about just taking action, getting the letters out the door. I see that being an issue for more people than picking the right list or doing things like that. So it's definitely better to target a little bit more. But in your case, you're doing very micro targeting, so it might pay off a little bit to do that. But in the end, if this comes down to like filtering off 5 or 10 names off of there, and that takes a bunch of time to do it, I just send a letter. Just go ahead and send it and see how it goes, and just talk to everybody. I like your approach though, Casey. I like what you're doing, raising the money, going after new properties, and I like how focused that is. I think that's another kind of competitive advantage that we can use. The bigger the company, where these people buying lots of properties, they by necessity they're going to be very spread out. They're trying to use their advantage, which is their money, their analytics ability. And when we go micro, they can work on AI and all artificial intelligence stuff as much as they want, but there's still an aspect of real estate which is very local and is very intuitive being on the ground. There's a lot of nuance in understanding what a good deal is. And maybe we'll have computers thinking for us, another 15, 20 years from now, who can do all the same intuitive thinking we're doing, but we're not there yet. And so I think we still have some advantages when you get really, really niched down, understanding, hey, maybe this side of the street is much better than this side of the street, because that one isn't closer to the highway and people don't like that as much, or this side of the condo building is better than the other side of the condo building for some reason. This size unit's a little bit better. Those kinds of things they still matter when you're buying investment properties, particularly when we're buying small number of properties, like most of us are. We're not going out and buying hundreds of properties. We're buying a couple properties a year in many cases, a lot of you. And so if that's the case, you can be very nuanced, very focused on what you're doing. All right, so Chris D has a follow-up question. Do you use seller financing mostly, or at this point, do you use your own cash or partners? So in order of I think behind this question is kind of what's my normal source of financing? And I would say in the order of most used source of financing, number one would be a private investor who has a self-directed IRA and who just loans me the money. That's been my most common in the last couple of years, but also over time. So going to another individual, typically it's been like an investor, it's a real estate investor, typically who's kind of already in more passive mode. They have a pretty big net worth. They're just trying to put their money to work, and they want to have at least a chunk of that retirement account they have invested in loans or in lending up to somebody who owns real estate, which is me in this case. And so those people have been my most common source of financing for deals. Seller financing is always, again, it's a tool in a toolbox. Like we bought a commercial property 2016, so a couple of years ago, and I was open to paying cash for it if we needed to, and using third-party money to do that, or we have our own money as well, so that's been more common lately. But in this case, the seller was willing to finance it at a 4% interest rate, a really good rate for a long period of time. And I was willing to pay a little bit of a premium for that, not a whole lot, but I was having to pay well below that full value if I just paid cash, and I was willing to pay a little bit closer to the full value if he had really good terms, because I could cash flow it okay, and I could hold on to it long term to let the price go up in value. So seller financing is often what I'll do is I'll make a seller financing offer and I'll make a cash offer. And typically the price is a little bit different. And so I present that offer to them kind of in a simple form and to see how they respond. If they say, no, I won't do seller financing because that's a 25-year loan. Like I'm not going to have my money out there that long. And then what would my response be at that point? Well, how long would you be willing to do that? And they might say, well, the most I would do is 10 years. And so maybe that would work. I don't know. We'll talk about it. We'd have to talk about the price, look at what that means. Maybe I'd have to lower the price a little bit in exchange for that. But that's how negotiations go, is like the more tools you have, you put them in an offer and you go. So seller financing is not the most commonly used one I have. It was more common early in my career because didn't have as much, my business partner and I didn't have as much capital, and we just had to do that. And so I made a lot more seller financing offers at that point. Today, it's just, again, it's less common, probably in order of use. It's equal with bank loans. I don't use a lot of bank loans. We did a commercial loan a couple of years ago too, on a bigger property, a bigger purchase amount. We mainly paid cash and used our own money and a private lender's money, but we also had a commercial loan for a portion of that. So I don't like to do those as much because the terms aren't as good. In many cases, you have a balloon note in 7 years, which I'm not a fan of. So I like to minimize those. I've very, very seldom done those kinds of loans, just in very particular situations where I was okay with that. So, so in your case, Chris, if it's early on, I think that's fine. You gotta start somewhere. You've got to grow somewhere. And I would use that seller financing, but I would very much emphasize going to private lenders and maybe thinking about the example that Casey gave earlier, like find credit partners who are willing. So a friend of yours might have down payment money and good credit, and they could be the one to go buy the property, and you can lease option it back from them. And so you want to be able to provide the seller cash if they want it, because most sellers are going to prefer that up front. Some of them, if you talk to them about the benefits of seller financing, also might see that as an advantage. But you always got to have a cash offer. Like if you don't have a way to give them cash, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities. So I think that's kind of the 1-2 play. You always want to have a creative option or two, like lease option, seller financing, but then you got to have a way to get them cash. And that's where private money lenders, borrowing from a self-directed IRA, credit partners who come up with the cash using another source, all of those are good ways to do it. Yeah, so you're not crazy about balloons either. Good to hear. Balloons sound so nice, like a little birthday party for kids or something. But balloons in the financing world is not cool. It's not what we want to depend on. All right. Yeah, good questions. So Chris says that cash, meaning you could do wholesaling. Yeah. I mean, you could wholesale a property. That's another option. But the issue with wholesaling is always an option, is if you can get it at a low enough price. That's the challenge of wholesaling. So, I think you also want to have an option to buy it for yourself if you want to keep it. If it's a good property for you, is there a way you can keep it? You can flip it yourself. You can keep it as a rental property. That's where these credit partners and self-directed IRA investing, all that kind of thing come in. But yeah, wholesaling is another tool in your toolbox, particularly for deals. Like for me, wholesaling was a business model earlier on where I had to wholesale a lot of stuff just because I didn't have enough money. The first year or two, particularly, I didn't have even money to go keep the properties myself. I had not developed enough relationships to do the seller financing. So if you have to wholesale a deal and make a $3,000 or $5,000 profit on it, that's not the end of the world, is it? You made some money, put that cash in your pocket, and keep going. But as soon as I could, I would talk to that person I wholesaled to if I trusted them and I felt like they were a good long-term partner, and let's see if we could do the deal together. If they put up the money and then I put up the deal, could we split it 50-50 somehow? 50% of a $30,000 profit, so $15,000 would be better than making a $3,000 or $5,000 wholesale fee. And you still don't have to put up the money. Let the other person put up the money. That's a deal many private investors would do all day long if you had to flip it or if you had to keep it as a rental. Find a person who's again, you got to trust this person. That's not an overnight kind of process. But if you get a money partner who can put up the money and or their credit, and then you can figure out a way to split it 50-50 going down the road. You brought the deal, you managed the deal, they put up the money. and you split it 50-50. There's a lot of tools to do that, like the master lease option that I talked about earlier. You could actually do a partnership where you have an LLC and all that, which is a little bit more complicated, but if you're going to do a lot of deals, that's possible too. But I think that's my emphasis, is to continue, start off wholesaling, start off doing that kind of thing, but eventually figure out ways to get bigger pieces of the pie so that you get more return, more benefit for the same amount of work. And that was a big leap for me and my business partner, was when we were doing the same amount of work to find these deals, but we were able to squeeze more profit out of them by partnering or by getting private money. All right, thanks for those questions. If y'all have some more follow-up questions, let me know. I'm going to go to a couple questions that I got in ahead of time. Let's see which one I want to do. All right, let's do this one. So the question is how cost effectively, how can you cost effectively manage real estate at a distance? And in this case, specific question was like 1,000 miles away or so. So you're on the other side of the country, or you're like me when I was in Ecuador, you're 1,000 miles away. How do you cost effectively manage your property? And I had this question ahead of time, so I was able to think about it a little bit. But I actually have 6 different parts, answers to that question. There's 6 different approaches you can use or tools you can use to manage a property at a distance. So I want to kind of unpack each one of those so that you can think about them and see how you could apply them as well. The simplest way to think about it is just hiring a full service property manager. So this is something we have done on a chunk of our properties. So we have a group of units that we bought together like all at one time, and we hired a third-party manager, even though in the past we had managed most of our properties ourselves. So we still self-manage through a kind of a key person who works with us. But you have these other properties that kind of outgrew our capability to manage them. And so we outsourced it to a third-party management company. Now, the benefits of that is they have everything built in kind of in-house. They have rent collection services, they have leasing in-house, they have the ability to take maintenance calls. So, that dreaded proverbial like midnight call with a leaky toilet that everybody's terrified of, and to get into real estate, which I think is very easy to solve, but it's easy to solve by having somebody else take that call and not you. So you have a third-party manager manage it for you. It seems to me the biggest objection I get when I talk about third-party managers, or 2 objections. One is there aren't any good managers out there. That's one I get. The other is you've got to pay them 10%. How can you make any money if you're paying somebody else 10% or so of your rent? So if it's $1,000 rental, you're paying them $100 a month to do that. Well, the first part is you've got to just keep looking. It's like any other business. There are good managers out there. You just gotta keep asking around. And there's certain locations that have fewer managers than others. Like I'm in a college town, and so there are a lot of managers, a lot of competition within a very small area. And some of them I would not let manage my properties. Other ones I've tried out and I've been happier with. So I think you got to ask around. You got to interview people, and then just pick and interview them in a way for 2 different things. Number one, I'm looking for like who's the owner of the company or the main manager of the company, and are they somebody with an integrity? Do they have long-term view? Are they taking care of their customers? Like, you just have a good gut feeling about being able to trust them. That's sort of what I'm getting at. That's part number 1. Part number 2 is asking about their systems and their processes. Are they competent enough to manage properties? And do they have are they staffed up to be able to handle it? So if they're managing 500 units and they have 1 or 2 people and that's all they have working there, that could be a problem. They need more people to manage that many. And so you look at those 2 things, and then you try them out. Like you can do a trial run. I think I like to do that with anybody that you're working with new. Let them manage 1 property, see how it goes. Tell them this is a trial run. We want to kind of test this out. If it works, great. We'll do more. I'll do more business with you. If it doesn't work for any reason, either way, then we can kind of get out of it and move on. So third-party full service management. The other objection was paying somebody money. My comment is you need to buy a property assuming you will always pay a third-party manager. So build in your pro forma that you have to pay a 10% management fee to somebody, for example. And if you do that, you don't have to hire somebody else to do it. But when you build that in, you always have the ability to do it. And so we've done this from the somebody told me this early on. I'm really glad I heard this early on. So we always built that in. And so we've been paying ourselves to manage properties for a long time. We actually have a separate company, two separate companies. One owns the property, one manages it. And so we pay the company that owns it, pays the company that manages it. And so that was very nice, because at some point when I start hiring other people within that company to do a lot of the tasks, I have enough money to be able to pay them to do it. I don't have to do it all myself. And so a lot of good property management, being able to outsource it, has to do with you buying the property correctly in the first place, running the numbers, analyzing it well, buying it well. And to me, that is well worth it when you know you can have peace of mind, you can travel, you can do different things because you have somebody else doing it. So, all right, so full service manager, that's kind of solution number one for being able to effectively manage at a distance. But what about people who want to do it yourself a little bit more? And I'm in that boat as well with other properties. So how can you do that? One cool tip I like is to find a real estate agent or a property manager, particularly like a smaller scale property manager, who's willing to be a leasing agent for you only. So what I mean by that is find somebody who's willing to go out and find you tenants. So show the property, help you get the application from that tenant, take calls from Zillow, follow up with people. So if you're long distance or if you're really busy at a job, like taking all those calls and showing, the leasing is the most intense part time-wise of being a landlord. So if you can get somebody else to help you do that, and you can pay them 50% of the rent, maybe you have to pay them a full month's rent. So that's negotiable. See what they're willing to do. If it's $1,000 rental, you're going to pay them $500 to $1,000 to get a tenant who hopefully stays. If you have a good property and you find good long-term tenants, at least a couple of years, 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years. And so you're paying an upfront fee, and then that can amortize and be much smaller than 10% management fee over the long run. And so once you get that person in there, the day-to-day management would be you. You'd be the one collecting rent, and I'll talk about some software and things to do that. But having a leasing agent, I think, takes one of the biggest, most intimidating parts of the landlording process off your plate. So I like that idea. A third really important idea, no matter what, is to have good team members, have good contractors, people you can call on. You can't do, if you do all the work yourself, that's fine too, but you got to have competent people who you can trust, who can go handle it and be your eyes and ears and be able to solve things well. So that's made my life a lot easier, having that team and knowing I can trust people. So how do you get that? Starts off with networking again, finding other people, talking to other investors, and trial and error too, and just making sure you use certain contractors and see if they work out or not. I also like to go to my investor network. So like if you're a member of a RIA group, or you do like Bigger Pockets meetups, things like that, you can actually have like a little group, almost like a local club of people who maybe you eat breakfast every once in a while together, and you're just with the other landlords and you exchange information, help each other out. Well, you could also kind of cover for each other whenever you're traveling or whenever something comes up. So like if you were going to go travel to Europe for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, it's not that big a deal for another landlord you hand them your cell phone and say, I'm going to be gone. I'll do the same thing for you when you're gone. Would you mind taking calls for me? And if there's something crazy comes up, you can always email me, call me, and we'll figure it out. But can you take calls and like talk to my tenants during that time and just make decisions? And you could give them a credit card if you trust this is somebody you trust, or they could put it on their credit card and you could reimburse them or something. So I like having a small team of people I trust and have other investors, other friends who can cover for each other. And we're all kind of small entrepreneurial landlords. I know we're not a big company. And so that having that network of local investors is a really cool way to help you manage things whenever you're either not there, or even if you live abroad. Like if you live in another part of the country, get to know the local investors and realtors and people in town who can help you do that kind of thing. All right, so we were talking about managing properties long distance. How do you do that? I've mentioned getting a full service manager, a leasing agent who can help you lease properties and you pay them for that, a good list of trustworthy contractors, an investor network, so kind of your buddies who also can help each other out and cover for each other. That was number 4. And number 5 and number 6 are going to be about processes or systems, and then automation. And so very early in my business partner and I read a really good book called The E-Myth. Has anybody heard that who's listening to this or watching this? If you ever heard of the E-Myth, let me know. By Michael Gerber. It's an old book. It's a classic. I guess old, it's relative, right? But it's a really good book, and it's all about building. Like the theme of the book is this: sometimes you have to work in your business, so you have to go collect rent, you have to take maintenance calls, and that's fine. We all do that. But every time you work in your business, you need to simultaneously work on your business. So working on your business means you look at that task you just did and ask yourself a question like, what are the steps I just took to do that? Could I document that and put that in a checklist? Can I build a process around what I just did? And for example, it might be every time you get a maintenance call, what do you say? Or do you have a form with certain questions you ask? Or do you have a form that says, maybe there's 5 situations that are the most common where the power stopped working or the light stopped working, and maybe that there's a good chance that a breaker switch got flipped or something. So you could ask them to do that. So the point is like, don't just do everything all the time. Actually step back from your business, think about it, and build systems and processes. And so we did that in the very beginning. That was one of the first books we read. And so we created this operations manual, physical one in that case. Now it's all online. But we had an operations manual where we had the acquisitions part of our business, we had the financing part of our business, we had the remodeling and rehab part of our business, and we had the leasing or sales in some cases part of our business. So all these kind of different. We treated our tiny little brand new business like they had different divisions of a company. And within each of those divisions, there would be certain paperwork we would save all of our contracts or acquisitions contracts, the checklist we would use, like when I'm closing on a property and buying it. There's a checklist just to say, here's all the things you do when you close on a property so you don't forget. And by the way, if you want that checklist, when you go to my site at coachcarson.com and get the free real estate investor toolkit, that's one of the documents you get is my closing checklist, which is very helpful so you don't forget something when you buy your next property. So all of that is kind of to say that if you are going to be long distance managing properties, you need to build some systems that you can outsource to other people. So have those processes, have those systems. And then if you have those systems, then it gets much easier to then start automating things. So we've had these, originally we just had processes and we did everything. Whereas now, sometimes there's automation kind of stuff you can do. So the best example I can think of is your rent payments. There's no reason good reason, I don't think, to go out and collect rent physically anymore. There are a lot of ways to use technology for people to pay their rent. We've been trying to switch over that for 4 or 5 years, but almost everybody, we have a small number who still send us checks, and we might have to kind of totally eliminate that because we didn't want to physically have to go somewhere and do something. If you're across the country, this makes it very possible to use probably my best recommendation is a software called cozy.co, COZY.co. They know some people who run the company or work there at the company and really like what they do. I like the technology, and I like that it's free for landlords. So they make their money whenever you do a credit check. And so they make their money on that part, but then they provide all the other stuff for free. So you can actually collect rent from your tenants, and it's free for you to do that. And so it just automatically gets deposited into your bank account. That's pretty cool. Cozy does a lot of other stuff as well. And so if you go to coachcarson.com/cozy, you can get a lot more details on them. I'm an affiliate for them. One of the few people I'm an affiliate, have affiliate products where I promote what they do and they pay me a commission. They're one of the ones I trust and like and use. So definitely recommend them if you decide to sign up with them. But the point is, things like Cozy and there's other software as well, can make your life a lot easier as a long distance landlord. It's just totally changed the game. I was in Ecuador for 17 months, and me being there and having things like that to collect the rent, having local people that we already talked about to help me out, but also just having things like online bill pay. You don't need to physically write checks anymore. And in case you haven't noticed, most of the people probably are younger than 35, 40. We all kind of do that now all the time anyway. I had that. My father and I have had this conversation. He's in the rental property business, and he was still doing checks. And I said, Dad, you don't have to write them. You can be in South Carolina or Australia or wherever you want to be, and you can still pay people and press a button, and the bank will send them a check. Or if they give you their bank account information, you can just deposit it directly to their account in a couple of days. It's better for everybody. So use technology and have that technology run your systems whenever you can. And then with the things you can't do with technology, then you hire that out. You hire your property manager, you hire a person locally to help you out, and then you kind of fill in the gaps. So that is a long-winded answer to sort of go over how my process for managing properties long distance. I'm going to give you, I don't know if I can give a link here in the YouTube live, but if I can, I'm going to share Landlording 101 article that I wrote, if I can do that. That has sort of a visual and step-by-step of all these systems that I've talked about. If you can, let's see, I'm looking it up right now. I'm going to put it in here if it lets me. That worked great. Okay, so Landlording 101. If it doesn't work, just Google Coach Carson Landlording 101, and that'll give you kind of the whole overview of pretty much what we just talked about. All right, so got more people on the call. Thank you all for being here. If you like what we're doing, give me a thumbs up, share it around, let people know about it. This is just, I'm here for you, and if we can get more people on, that's better. So just like it and share it for me. Miguel Castillo says, Miguel, how are you? Good to have you on here. Says, what would you suggest to protect your assets besides insurance? I've heard mixed things about forming LLC to protect your personal assets, as well as I've just heard to get more insurance. That's a good question, Miguel. Of course, qualify this that an attorney who specializes in this is really the most qualified to do it, because they're actually involved in litigation. They understand how the process of losing your money to litigation or risk works. I'm an investor who talks to attorneys and tries to make my best judgment call. So I'm not your final call on this. I guess is my main point. That's just a disclaimer. But yeah, I can just tell you what I do. And I think about insurance first and foremost, because insurance is your sort of first line of defense. And if you do get sued, which I, knock on wood, have not gotten sued, I hope I don't, but it could happen at some point. If you have liability insurance and you're not doing something illegal or fraudulent, which I don't plan on doing, then they could hire an attorney to defend you, and that's a big deal, because even if it's a frivolous lawsuit, that could be something that'll help you out. And if you get enough insurance coverage, so your typical hazard insurance policy has, let's just say, it has $500,000 or $250,000. It doesn't take a lot to raise that to $500,000, and I'm not sure the limit on every single insurance company, but you can get that as high as you can, and it's typically pretty cheap to get that insurance to be more, to cover more. And if you don't feel like you even want to be even more comfortable, a lot of insurance agents will sell a policy called a umbrella policy. So you might have like one policy. If you had 5 properties, you'd have a policy on each property. Each one of those maybe has $500,000. And then you might have an umbrella policy that covers another $2 million at a pretty cheap cost typically. Sometimes those are hundreds of dollars per year for an additional $2 million in coverage. It's amazing. And so that would, if you ever got sued and lost above that initial insurance, the umbrella policy would cover you. So that's, most investors I talk to, that's kind of a first priority to do that. And actually, I would say that's second priority. The first priority is to preempt lawsuits in the first place by talking to people, by doing the right thing, by not screwing people over. There's a lot of landlords who don't get that you're not in business to screw people over. And even when you do have disagreements, so even if you're not screwing people over, people might perceive that, or they might not like what you're doing. I've certainly had a couple cases like that in the past where we had disagreements with people. And so what's the proper way to handle that? Is it to get mad and get in a fight and ignore them, or to act like an adult and actually discuss it with them, swallow your pride? And in some cases, you might have to give in and avoid a more expensive conflict. And let's say they were asking for money to reimburse them for something and you didn't agree with them. Maybe you have to pay them some money instead of paying an attorney to go do a lawsuit. So I think that's number one. Just treat people like you'd want to be treated. Follow the golden rule. When you do have problems, don't ignore them. Go talk to the person. Have that. I call that like a sweaty palm conversation. That makes me nervous. Like, I don't like that conversation that I have to have with a person who's angry or a person who has a problem. But don't ignore it. Like, as early in the process as you can, treat them like they're important. Go address that problem. Do your best, and try to help them solve it. And don't be afraid to spend a little bit of money. If you're just trying to be cheap, sometimes that's where we get into trouble, and it ends up costing you a lot down the line. That's number one. Number two is insurance. Number three, and this is where I'm not as qualified to talk about it. Like, should you have LLC? Should you not? How many LLCs should you have? Should you have these things called series LLCs where you own like each property in an LLC? there's all sorts of conversations there. I think that the general asset protection thing that made the most sense to me is not to have all your eggs in one basket. So have eventually when you get enough assets, this isn't for like a brand new investor, but eventually you want to split things up and put them in separate baskets. And an LLC is typically what a lot of investors use to hold properties. So maybe if you had $1 million worth of equity and in real estate, maybe you split those up into $250,000 buckets. Maybe that's like 3 properties per LLC or something. Now, the negative of that's a smart thing to do asset protection wise, perhaps. The negative of that is it might have additional paperwork, it might have additional filing requirements in your state. There's going to be additional bookkeeping if you have separate books for each one of those LLCs. So I've always found that there's a trade-off between hassle and all the time you spend on that stuff and then the protection it gives you. So you've got to find your own balance point and work with your attorney who's going to help you do that to understand what it takes to actually do that correctly. Because if you get a bunch of LLCs and you don't do them correctly, you sort of wasted your time. Because if you don't file the report you're supposed to file, if you don't treat it like a real business, you might have a piece of paper that says you have an LLC, but there might be some attorney who then can tear right through that and treat it like it's not an LLC because you didn't do it correctly. So I think that's the point, is you just want to make sure whatever strategy you have, you execute it correctly and you understand it and it makes sense to you. And this is an area I could always learn more in, and I'm always curious to learn more and can do better in. But I think if you take care of those first 2 fundamentals that I've talked about, treating people well, running your business the way you'd want to be treated, treating your tenants the way you'd want to be treated, and contractors and other people, and then having insurance. Those are kind of just the basics of what everybody should do. Miguel says, that's exactly what I heard from a lawyer. Just wanted to confirm it from someone like you. Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm glad at least there's one lawyer who we said the same thing. That's good to hear. Yeah, so treating people respectfully and fair is a key. And I think most of us we're here learning, we're trying to be good people, and we're not going to intentionally do that. So I think the problem where we might get in trouble sometimes is we make business, and I know this has been the pressure for me in the past. You make business decisions. Maybe you buy a bad deal, is a negative cash flow. It's just not a good deal, and you get frustrated. And here it is, somebody wants you to spend a bunch of money on your property when you're already losing money, and they think you're this rich landlord who has a bunch of money when it's not true. You're losing money. And so sometimes coughing up more money for a situation, you can use your emotions instead of your logic to understand, like, this is a risk reward thing. You might just need to fix that thing that is your fault, even though it's going to cost you money. Fix it. So thank you for asking that, Miguel. Appreciate it. That's a good conversation, good topic. Definitely something we can all learn a lot more about. Shane Donnelly. Hey, good afternoon, Shane. Thanks for being here. His question is, my wife and I own a home with 10% equity that we're thinking of selling and house hacking. Can you speak a little bit about the cost benefit of house hacking versus buying a separate rental from your primary residence? Yeah, you set me up well, Shane. You got my favorite topic to talk about. I can't go through one Ask Coach Live without talking about house hacking. So thank you very much for doing that. I think your main question was, should you go just buy a separate rental property and just rent it without living in it, or should you buy a house hack? I always recommend house hacking, and there's a couple of variations of house hacking. Like house hacking, if you don't know what that means, somebody's watching this, means you buy a property that you basically turn into an investment. It's like that you live in it and you also treat it like an investment. So here's what I mean by that. You could live in a duplex and rent one side out so that you generate some income from the duplex to cover part of your living expenses. That's like kind of a classic house hack, to live in a duplex, triplex, or a fourplex. That's one way. Another way would be to live in a house. Like I have a friend, Drew at guyonfire.us, another blogger. He lived in a house, so a 4-bedroom house, and he rented out, or I think a 3-bedroom house. He rented out the 2 extra bedrooms to his college buddies. This was his first home. So he had roommates, and he paid, and they just got out from college. What's the difference? Having roommates and sharing kitchen and doing that. So that's kind of, we call that a live-in house hack. So that's one way to do it. That doesn't sound like your situation, Shane. You could also do Airbnb house hack, where you rent out like a basement or an extra bedroom every once in a while it's a short-term rental, or a garage apartment. So that's kind of a cool way to do it too. So all of those are house hacking. you could, but another way to think about house hacking. The reason I like doing house hacking, a couple of reasons. One is it's a little bit lower risk in terms of the learning curve. So you're going to live there in a house hack. You're going to be next door. There's always things that can go wrong with as a landlord when you're learning something, right? We always know we're going to make a couple mistakes, but when you're on site, you're learning while you're there. It's kind of like owning your own home. It's not going to be the end of the world. You're going to be there if there's a problem, if a tenant has an issue, if you see a roof leak or something like that. So it's just a little bit less drama, and it's also you're learning while you're living there. So I like that learning curve. Whereas when you buy a rental property separately, it's just a little bit more throwing you in the deep end of the pool. So I like that. I also like the financing angle. So owner-occupant financing is the cheapest, meaning the lowest interest rate, the lowest costs, has the best down payment program. So you have a lower down payment typically for an owner-occupant loan than you will if you're going to be just buying a property separately just as a landlord. So you're going to get better financing. That's the point. So you have 10% equity in your property. Let's set that question aside about what to do with that property. But no matter what, on this next property you buy, if you were to go buy a investment property separately, you're probably going to have to put 20-25% down as an investment property. If you move into the house, you might be able to get in with like an FHA loan, would be 3.5% down. If you're a veteran, you can move in with 0% down. But even if you're not a veteran or you don't want to use FHA, you could use a lot of conventional programs have 5 and 10% down payment programs. So there's lots of options because you moved into it with a lower down payment. And so those are some of the main benefits, I would say. And in your particular case, Shane, we could talk more details about it. But one thing I would wonder is do you need to sell the house you're living in order to move into a house hack? Or could you do what we call like a live in, then rent? Like you're living in that house. Does that house you're in now make sense to rent it out and just have that be your first rental property? And then you move in either to another house or even better, move into like a duplex or a triplex or a house with a basement apartment. I really like that because now you have to save up some more money for that next house, of course, without selling this house. But if this house that you're in now makes sense as a long-term rental, you already have a loan on it. You already know the property. You can kind of get it ready and for tenants, make sure it's low maintenance and put tile in the kitchen and things like that. You now have 2 rental properties. You'd have the old one and then the one you move into if you can swing that. So that's another thing to think about. But I love house hacking. I love the benefits of it. I see it as a great way to do your first couple deals. But I've known people who have done 3 or 4 of those, and that's all they have to do. Like they acquired 4 duplexes or 4 triplexes or 4 houses, and now they move on with their life. They did that for 5 or 6 years, and now they move on to a regular old house. They move, they have kids, they do other things, and so it's a kind of a transition point in your life where you start off that transition into rental properties or into other types of investing after that. All right. So yeah, thanks, Shane. Thanks for that question. That's good to talk about. Good luck with your decision. All right, another question from Miguel. So it said, let's see. So Miguel said, that's exactly what I did. I'm an accidental landlord. He was renting, and renting was the best decision I ever made. I'm at the point of having 1 rental, but I have a significant amount of equity. Awesome. Good. So you moved out of your home and then rented out your old home on accident, it sounds like. But that worked out for you. Your conundrum now is, do you pay it off first or use the equity to expand? So you have this rental property and you wonder whether you should just go ahead and finish paying off that loan, or should you use that cash that you would use on paying the loan off to go buy the next rental property. It's a really good question. And it's a really common dilemma in a lot of our minds. I've had the same exact dilemma in my rental business. Actually 2016, my business partner and I had accumulated some cash from selling properties and from saving up money. We're like, what should we do? We could just pay off our debt and be, closer to being, even lower risk, or should we go invest a little bit more and grow a little bit more? So part of that is going to be personal preference, just what your risk profile is. If you're just nervous all the time about having any kind of debt and it just feels better to do that, it could be a reasonable decision to just go ahead and pay it off. I think that if you just ran the hard, cold math of it, I kind of look at my investing career as you go through a growth phase and then you go through like a stabilization or a risk reduction stage, which is like paying off debt or kind of stabilizing your portfolio. And then you go through the stage where you're living off your investments. And you could do that, like you could do that and then do it again. So you could go through all three of those stages and then go up again. So kind of like get to a plateau of a mountain, get a certain stabilized rental income, and then start growing again. And I've sort of done that too. In your case, Miguel, I think if you eventually want to get it free and clear, the question is, how many free and clear properties do you need in the end? And so the cold hard math would say to use that capital you have right now, as long as that loan you have right now is not dangerous, it doesn't have a big balloon coming up, it's not a really high interest rate or something, or adjustable interest rate, you could leave that one in place, and or maybe even, people who are more aggressive might even refinance that property and pull out some capital from that and get a low interest long-term loan if you needed to grow and buy some more properties. So you could use that capital to buy 2 or 3 more rental properties. And then if you're closer to your number at that point, if you looked at it and said, all right, I've got 3 properties or 4 properties, if I just paid these off now, I would be in pretty good shape. I'd have a nice stable income that I'd be happy with. Then you would transition from that growth phase into a debt paid on down phase, like a risk reduction phase. And there's nothing sexy about that stage. It's just basically saving all your money, taking all your cash flow from those rental properties, taking all the cash flow you can get from your job, saving money, flipping an extra house or doing a side business somewhere to make some extra money, as much cash as you can get, and you just start plowing it back into a snowball and paying all those off. But I like separating those out into the growth phase, the debt pay down phase, and then the live off your income phase, because they all have different sort of strategies and focuses and approaches. So if you separate them out like that, I think it's helpful for you. But there's nothing wrong, going back to like the fork in the road here, there's nothing wrong with doing little mini cycles. Like you could just go pay off this one rental property, get that thing paid off. And then once that's paid off, now you have a lot more cash flow to then go do your next deal. So it's sort of like, instead of buying multiple properties, you're just doing it one at a time. There's nothing wrong with that either. It's going to take you a little bit longer. Perhaps you miss out on some opportunities. Like what if you had a deal that you could have bought that was available, but used all your cash to buy, to pay that loan down. So maybe you miss some opportunities. But it's kind of you knowing if you don't think there's that many opportunities out there for you right now, if you're not going to be looking for properties in the next year, maybe you go ahead and pay it off. But if you think there's a good chance you're going to find some more deals and you need to grow more, maybe you lean more towards that. I think that's the decision matrix, but it's a very personal decision. Like I could see, and I have seen, talking to people who had asked the question before, people going both routes and it being the right decision in both cases. So you have to think about that for yourself too. All right, I see Laurie Klein is here. Hey, Laurie, thanks for being here. Do you think, her question is, do you think taking a 401k loan for a down payment is a good strategy? All right, let me explain what a 401k loan is first, just so people who don't know what that is. A lot of 401k programs have a mechanism where you can basically borrow your own money. So you can borrow your retirement money, and you typically have to pay a reasonable interest rate. So let's just say you had to pay, the market interest rate. Let's say it was 5%. So you can't go and borrow at 0% is the point. You've got to actually pay an interest rate that's reasonable, I believe. So you probably have to look at the terms of your actual 401k agreement. And so the point is you can borrow money. And I think you could tell me, maybe Laura, you've looked into it. I think there's a cap of $50,000 in a lot of cases, but let me know if that's not right. And so you could go borrow that money, pay 5% interest on it, use it as a down payment for something else. So I have actually had a coaching student who did that on a property. He used the 401k loan for part of his down payment on a property. We discussed it long and hard, and we kind of looked at it at the risk and the reward of doing that. And here's what I told him, and in his situation, it might be the same for you as well. The risk of borrowing that money is that you have a payment on it. And so yes, the payment's going to you, but you've got to pay that loan back. And so typically with down payment money, it's more flexible in that, when you're basically 100% leveraged, that's what you need to look at it as. You're borrowing money from yourself, but it's almost like it's just a lower risk way to borrow the money than going to the bank or borrowing on a credit card or something. but you're still 100% leveraged because you're going to get a mortgage for maybe 80% of the purchase price, and then you're going to have this loan to your 401k for another 20%. And the risk is, will the cash flow from this rental property cover all of that payment going out? And it's very difficult to cash flow 100% financing, typically. So if that's the case, so let's say it's going to be negative cash flow, you're not going to be able to cover all of that loan. The next question is, can you afford to quickly pay that loan back? And in his case, that was, he said yes. Like, it wasn't the fact that he was going to have to keep that 401k loan out there for the next 10 years. He was going to quickly pay that loan back over the next year or so. It was just him getting some bonuses and, freeing up some capital from some other places. And so it's more of a short-term loan. And so in his case, that made more sense to me, as opposed to having a 401k loan out there for a long time, or any kind of 100% leverage out there for a long time. That is, having negative cash flow or very tight cash flow didn't make as much sense to me in that case. But so if it's a way to get you into that first deal, is always the most difficult doing those first couple of deals, because you're strapped for cash, you're trying to figure out how to do this. And so it can make sense if you're careful to do that. With my big caveat is, you always got to run the numbers. Like, if you get into a deal with highly leveraged and the numbers don't make sense, like there's negative cash flow, or if you have a loan that is going to adjust 2 or 3 years from now, or if you have a balloon 5 years from now, like, that's getting into a risky situation. But if you're getting a long-term mortgage, once you pay that 401k loan off, it cash flows positive. If it's in a good location with good long-term prospects, it's just a way for you to get into a deal. And that's what all of us, when we're new, have to kind of stretch a little bit to do that. So I think that's not an easy answer, but I think that's my line of thinking, Laurie. And it said this is your 6th rental property, so you've been around you've been around and seen these other deals, and you kind of know whether it's going to be a good deal or not. So if you're just using it to knock down that extra deal, and it's going to do well for you, then I think as long as you're going into it wide-eyed and understanding your risk, it can be a good approach to do it. Thank you for asking that, Laurie. I appreciate it. All right, Ryan G just came in. He said, I came in and maybe you answered this question, but what is the best way to pay off my student loans? So I owe $70,000. All right. This is one of those, I always tell people at the beginning of question and answer calls, usually, that if it's not my expertise, I'm going to say so up front. So paying off student loans is not my expertise, primarily because I haven't had personal experience doing it. I was fortunate enough to have a college scholarship. When I got out of college, I played football. And so I did take a beating and had some old recurring injuries in my back, for example. But other than that, that's a liability, probably worse than debt. But other than that, I'm okay. Financially, I didn't have any debt. So I want to defer you to, I'm going to give you a little response that I think my general approach. But I have a friend who has a website called studentloanplanner.com. His name is Travis, and he and I have had a lot of conversations about all the different student loan repayment programs and what's out there. And if anybody I know, he is like he's on top of everything of what's available out there and the best approaches because sometimes paying it off in a certain way might make sense, and you might want to refinance it in some cases, and there's government programs. So I would check out Travis's website, and he does consultations if you needed one-on-one information, but he's got a ton of good free information on his site. But to me, like if you look at it and you're not going to refinance it, and it's just a matter of paying it off, I just treat it. I do like debt snowballs on any debt I have. I think the debt snowball is a really good approach. Just once you're ready to attack it and pay it off, you just start attacking one at a time. And so don't put all your extra cash flow on a bunch of different loans. Like, do one at a time. And there's arguments about how you do that. Do you do it like the mathematically most sound approach is to attack your highest interest loan first and try to attack that one and pay it off, because you're basically paying off the most expensive one, so that when that's free and clear, now you freed up a lot more cash flow to pay off the second one and the third one. There's another argument, though, like the Dave Ramsey model, is to say to pay off the smallest first, kind of put them in order of small, big to bigger. And every time you pay off a smaller one, it's this kind of emotional satisfaction. It's kind of cool to know I got that one paid off. And there's also, it's like climbing a mountain. I always compare, like when you're building wealth, you get to these little plateaus, you take a break, you relax, you get your energy back up, you go again. And I like Dave Ramsey's approach for that reason, because you get to relax. You paid off that one, there you go. And so that's either one of those would work, but debt snowballs are cool. You can use them in your personal student loans. You can use them on credit cards. You can use them in rental properties, as we talked about earlier. But I think keep that debt snowball in mind, Ryan. And then check out Travis. He's a good resource. Miguel says, Chad, have to leave, but really appreciate your time and input. Awesome. Thank you. And really can't wait to read your book. Thank you very much. Yeah, the book is out. The audio book is coming, I hope, in the next week or two. This has been a journey on the audiobook. We turned it into Audible, and it came back with needing some edits for Bigger Pockets on their end. It wasn't anything I did, I don't think. But then we never got the message from Audible, and it was like a month or two of just, behind the scenes Audible drama. I'm getting my audiobook up there, but that is coming. I recorded the book, so if you like that format of reading and listening to Retire Early with Real Estate in audio format on Audible, it'll be there soon. You can also get the Kindle and the regular book on Amazon, so that they're available, or Bigger Pockets as well. There's going to be a Thanksgiving sale on Bigger Pockets coming up soon. I think it's going to be 25 or 50% off of the book. So go to biggerpockets.com/store. And you can see my book in there too. All right. Any other thoughts? I think we've done it, folks. We've done an hour and 15 minutes. We were able to chat about real estate. We had all sorts of cool conversations. Thank you so much for being there. I'm going to do this again. I'm trying to find my regular schedule. I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to do it every week or maybe twice a month. I'm going to do Ask Coach. I'm definitely going to be doing it regularly, but look out soon. If you're on my email list or if you're on my social media channels, I'll let you know when I get a good schedule. I'm thinking perhaps either every Wednesday in the middle of the day, or the first and third Wednesday of every month would be Ask Coach Live. And I'm going to get it where I'll do YouTube and Facebook at the same time. And so I can, whichever preference you have, then we can do that. So I will see you there. Look out for Ask Lives. Be sure to follow me on my newsletter. Stay in touch that way. That's my most regular way to communicate with you and share things with my blog articles and what events are going on, opportunities I have, courses, things like that. And this is going to be available as a recording. So if you want to go back and listen to this, it'll be available on my YouTube channel. So just stick around here and you can look at it. So thank you all for your time, for being here. It means a lot that you spend some time with me. I appreciate it. And Bill Ramirez says, will Clemson cover on Saturday? I don't know. Duke's pretty good these days, and they've done well against us in the past. So I don't know. I'm just enjoying the ride. I'm a Clemson Tiger fan, if you don't know it. So I like watching my Clemson Tigers. I used to play football there. You can see my helmet in the background. You probably noticed that. So my little kids like to come around and put the helmet on and run around with it sometimes. So that's fun to do. But thank you all. I've enjoyed talking to you. Hope to see you again soon. Good luck with your real estate investing, and let's stay in touch. Have a good day.